Hey guys, this is Francesca from Under the Covers. Welcome back to the channel, and today I'm doing something a little bit different. I am going to be recapping the top 20 authors that I read the past decade. I think it's really exciting to look back on the last 10 years and what I was reading and see which authors were the ones that I just had to gobble up everything that they released. So that's what I'm sharing with you guys here today. I will also try and give you guys a couple of recommendations of my favorites from each one of the authors that I talk about. So how did I come up with the list is that I actually have a reading log on Airtable. I will leave a link up here to my digital reading log, which is a video that shows you how I do that and how I keep track of my reading. I did import all my data from GoodReads into that spreadsheet, so I'm able to see everything that I read for the past decade. Now, there is a feature on GoodReads that shows you which are your most read authors, and when I try looking at this in the past, it does include the books that are on my to read shelf. So I don't think it's an accurate depiction of which ones are my most read authors, just because I tend to add things to my to read on GoodReads so that I don't forget that I want to read them. So that list was completely inaccurate for me, and that's why I had to go into this spreadsheet. If you want to use this spreadsheet, I will leave a link in the information box down below so you can copy the database that I use. Now, I will say there are more than 20 authors in this video, and that is because I actually just picked 20 spots. And if any authors were tied for the number of books that I read, I just counted them both for that spot. So I kind of wanted to do 20 spots instead of 20 authors. It's a little bit cheating, but I didn't want to have to pick which one would be higher or lower on the list if I had read the same amount of books. That being said, coming in at number 20 is Tessa Dare. I read 18 books in the last decade from Tessa Dare. Now, all of those obviously are historical romances. I think she writes great romantic comedy type historical romances, and you can't go wrong picking up any of her books. I definitely think that you should read her more recent one, which is the Girl Meets Duke series, or you can also check out her Spindle Cove series, which is still to this date one of my favorite series by her, or her Castles Ever After series, which the first book has one of the best grumpy heroes in historical romance. Coming in at 19 is Kim Harrison, and I read 19 books by Kim Harrison in the past decade. A lot of those come from the Hollows series, which is an urban fantasy series that I think everybody should read. Now, I will mention that the first book in that series, Dead Witch Walking, it is a little bit hard to get into, maybe even difficult to finish, and I personally almost DNF'd that book, but I am so glad I pushed myself and continued reading the series because they are some of the best urban fantasy books that I have read. Great world building, great characters, great plot, and a very satisfying romance in the end. But aside from that, I also recommend you check out her sci-fi book, The Drafter, which is the first book in the Perry Reed Chronicles series. Coming in at number 18 is Shayla Black, and I read 21 books in the past decade from Shayla Black. Now, that is probably some of my binge reading earlier on in the decade because I have sort of stopped reading Shayla Black in the past few years. A lot of the recommendations that I'll have for you today here are a little bit older, but Shayla Black has written one of my favorite erotic romance series that have a little bit of suspense, and that is the Wicked Lover series. I absolutely love that series, and my absolute favorite book in that series that I read is Belong to Me. It is still to this date one of my favorite erotic romances with BDSM and a little bit of suspense elements, so definitely check that book out. You could read it as a standalone if you want. She also has an erotic romance series that has more of a political intrigue kind of plot that's also an erotic suspense, and she co-authors that with Lexi Blake. The first book in that series I also really enjoyed, and it's called Scandal Never Sleeps. And then she also has a paranormal romance series that may not be as known or popular, but I really enjoyed it, and that is the Doomsday Brethren series, and the first book in that series is Tempt Me with Darkness. For the number 17 spot, we have a tie, and that is L.H. Cosway and Lara Adrian. They are both tied at 22 books each. Now, both of them are some of my favorite authors, and I still do read and enjoy their books. With Lara Adrian, I would lean more towards her paranormal romances because that's what I absolutely adore. I fell in love with the Midnight Breed series, so definitely that would be where I suggest that you start with Kiss of Midnight. She does have also a spin-off, which is the Hunter Legacy series, and you could kind of start there, but I do recommend starting with the Midnight Breeds and then moving on to the Hunter Legacy. I think that that's a series that's perfect for fans of J.R. Ward and the Black Dagger Brotherhood. They're great vampires and they are the protectors of the race, so there's a lot of similarities, but also in a lot of ways it's completely different. I absolutely loved it, and I love her writing style. And then for L.H. Cosway, I always have to go back to the first book that I read by her, which is still one of my favorites, and that is Painted Faces. Absolutely adored it, must read. And also her first book in the Hart series. The Hart series is my favorite series by L.H. Cosway, and the first book, which is absolutely amazing, is Six of Hearts. Now at number 16 we have Maya Banks, and I read 23 books by Maya Banks. Most of that, same like with Shayla Black, is my binge reading earlier on in the decade, and is an author that I also have sort of stopped reading the past few years. But I definitely recommend the Sweet series if you're looking for erotic romance with a little bit of suspense element. It starts with Sweet Surrender, but my favorite book in that series is Sweet Seduction. And then she also has a romantic suspense series called the KGI series. It starts with The Darkest Hour, but my favorite book in that series is No Place to Run. And one last recommendation that's probably one of the more recent ones that I read, which is still not very recent, is Rush. And that is book 1 in her erotic romance series, Breathless. Coming in at number 15, I have another tie, and that is Kelley Armstrong and Lisa Kleypas. I read 24 books from each of these authors. Now for Kelley Armstrong, the thing that I'm going to recommend the most is the Women of the Other World series. This is a really strong urban fantasy series. It's a little bit different than other urban fantasy series where they follow the same couple throughout the whole series. In this one, you actually get books for different couples. So one couple may have 2 or 3 books, another couple may have 1 book, and so on and so forth. So it does change who the main protagonists are throughout the series, which I found that was very interesting, and it gave us a really well-rounded view of this world. It has all the different supernaturals, vampires, shifters, necromancers, demons, witches, and everything you can imagine. The plots are really strong, and I absolutely adore the characters in it. Another little bit more recent series from her that I enjoyed is the Canesville series. This is more of a thriller with very light paranormal elements to it. And then we have Lisa Kleypas, and what can I just not recommend about Lisa Kleypas? I think that you should read every single book she's ever written. For historical romance, some of her must-reads are the Wallflower series, the Hathaway series, and the Ravenel series. And for contemporary romance, which I think you definitely should check out her contemporary romances, there's the Travis series and the Friday Harbor series. Coming in at number 14 is Elle Kennedy. I read 26 books by Elle Kennedy. I absolutely adore her writing style, and probably my favorite series overall by her is the Killer Instinct series, and that is romantic suspense. I really wish she would write more in this genre because it's what I think that she does best, although she is really great at new adult, but there's something about her romantic suspense that really makes her stand out for me in that genre. So if you haven't read that series, definitely put it on your TBR. It starts with Midnight Rescue, but my favorite is Midnight Action. Of course, we have her very well-known new adult books, and that is the Off-Campus series and the Briar U series. My favorite still probably to this date being The Deal. Coming in at number 13 is Sarina Bowen, and I read 27 books by Sarina Bowen in the last decade. I actually forgot to mention with Elle Kennedy one of my favorite books, which is a collaboration between those two authors, and that is Him. And also I will mention Top Secret. So they co-author these male-male romances, and I think they are perfect entry-level male-male romances if you haven't read too much of the genre. They are super adorable. But for Sarina Bowen's titles, I really enjoy the True North series and the Brooklyn Bruiser series. So the True North series has a little bit more of a small town feel, and each book is completely different than the other. The first book being Bittersweet, and I really enjoyed the grumpy hero in that one. And the Brooklyn Bruisers, which is a sports romance. I actually will say that my favorite was Brooklynaire probably, which is actually the owner of the team, so it had very little sports in it. At number 12, we have Karina Halle, and I read 28 books by Karina Halle in the last decade. I really binge read a lot of her books, especially the Experiment in Terror series, which is still to this date one of my favorite things she's ever written. Dex and Perry are one of the best couples in paranormal romance, so if you haven't read that series, what are you waiting for? It's just so good, and I don't think it receives the amount of credit and people don't talk about it enough, but it's so addictive. The first book in that series is Dark House. Then I really adored her dark romance series, The Artist Trilogy. And the first book in that series is Sins and Needles. I did go on to read, I think, one book from the spin-off and then I stopped, so I may actually be tempted to pick that up again this year. She also has a lot of great standalone romances like The Pact and Love in English and some others, so definitely check out her books if you want a really fun type of contemporary romance. Coming in at number 11, I have Shiloh Walker, and I read 29 books by Shiloh Walker. I will recommend, for the most part, some of her romantic suspense. I think that she writes amazing romantic suspense. One of my favorites that I always recommend is the Ash trilogy, and the first book in that is If You Hear Her. You do need to read the whole trilogy in order to find out who the killer is, so be warned of that. But each one of the books has a different HEA in terms of the romance. For a great romantic suspense standalone, I recommend Stolen by Shiloh Walker. And she also has a psychic romantic suspense series, so it does have some paranormal elements in it, and that is the FBI Psychics, my favorite book being The Protected. Coming in at number 10, I have another tie, and that is Roni Loren and Vivian Arend. I read 30 books each from these authors. So for Roni Loren, one of my absolute favorites is her erotic romance. I think that that is going to be one of my all-time erotic romance series. It does have also an element of suspense. Every book is so good. Actually, every book just gets better and better. So if you haven't read that series, it starts with Crash Into You, and you just need to read the whole series because they are so, so good. She also now has written a contemporary romance series, which I absolutely adored. The first book in that being The Ones Who Got Away. And another great erotic romance title from her is Off the Clock, which is the first in the Pleasure Principle series. For Vivian Arend, I definitely recommend her Six Pack Ranch series, which is a cowboy romance, and they are set in Canada, so it's a little bit different than some of the other cowboy romances I've read, but I absolutely adore that series. Now that one starts with Rocky Mountain Heat. Another great contemporary romance series by her is the Adrenaline Search and Rescue series, so obviously it is centered around a search and rescue team. The first book in that series is High Risk, but my favorite is High Passion. And she also writes paranormal romance, and I think her paranormal romances are a little bit on the shorter side, and they're great when you want something light and fun to pick you up. And the two series that I read are the Granite Lake Wolves and the Taquini Wolves. Coming in at number 9 is Kresley Cole. I have read 31 books in the past decade for Kresley Cole, and she's one of my favorites. One of the must-read paranormal romance series is the Immortals After Dark series, and that is one that I just can't get tired of recommending to people, so definitely read that if you haven't. She also has the Arcana Chronicles for YA, and that starts with Poison Princess, and she also wrote one of the best contemporary erotic romance series out there, that is the Game Maker series, and that starts off with The Professional. Coming in at number 8 is Larissa Ione. I read 32 books by Larissa Ione. That includes the titles that she wrote with Stephanie Tyler, and their pen name together was Sydney Croft, so those titles are included here. So for Larissa Ione, I have to recommend the Demonica series, and this is actually a series that has a lot of spin-offs, but I do highly recommend that you're reading it in order and you put those spin-offs in between the books where they need to go. So really do pay attention to the reading order of the series. Now the Demonica series starts off with Pleasure Unbound, and one of the spin-offs is the Lords of Deliverance series, and that's actually one of my favorite takes in paranormal romance for the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And the other thing that I want to recommend to you guys are her books that she writes with Stephanie Tyler. Now these are under the pen name Sydney Croft, and they are the Acro series. These are also paranormal romance, and they're kind of X-Men erotic romance. Absolutely love them. Coming in at number 7 is Megan Hart, and I read 33 books by Megan Hart. Now she writes a ton of standalone titles, so I would be here forever if I were to recommend Megan Hart books. I adore her writing style. It's very emotional, so be sure that you're picking her books up when you're in the mood for maybe having your heart gutted. Some of the books that I can recommend are Dirty, Tempted, Tear Me Apart. Those are all standalone contemporary romances. There's also Hold Me Close, which is a contemporary romance as well, standalone, and it's more of a dark read. There's also the Kate and Leah series that she co-authored with Lauren Dane, and her historical romance series, The Order of Solace, which I think starts with Pleasure and Purpose. Coming in at number 6, we have Nalini Singh. I read 34 books by Nalini Singh. I absolutely adore her writing. I know that you guys probably already know the Side Changeling series, so definitely put that on your list if you want PNR. If you want urban fantasy, definitely put the Guild Hunter series on your list. And if you want contemporary romance, 2 of my favorites by her are Rock Hard and Cherish Hard. Those are from 2 different series, but they are spin-offs of each other, and the heroes in those 2 books that I mentioned are actually siblings. And of course, I can't not mention her debut as a thriller author, and that was A Madness of Sunshine, which I really also enjoyed. Coming in at number 5 is J.R. Ward. I read 40 books by J.R. Ward in the last decade. I definitely do prefer her paranormal romance, and that is obviously the Black Dagger Brotherhood, but I did enjoy her Fallen Angel series, my favorite book in that series being still Envy. Her Bourbon Kings series, which is a contemporary romance that's very much a soap opera, and her more gritty contemporary romance that she recently released, and that is Consumed. And from her older contemporary romance titles that she wrote as Jessica Bird, probably my favorite was Leaping Hearts. If I'm not mistaken, that was her debut novel. So in the number 4 spot, I have another tie, and that is Lora Leigh and Jaci Burton, both at 43 books each. I read a lot of books by these authors. I still remember my binge of Lora Leigh because it took up so much of my time, but I read pretty much her whole backlist back to back earlier on in the decade. So I will recommend her Breed series. It is her most popular series, I would say, and it's still being written. That is paranormal romance. Now, the first few books may not be as strong, and I definitely recommend that you push through that. There's so many amazing books in this series, and they're definitely worth pushing those first few that may seem a little off and a little weird. Now, if you're looking for romantic suspense that's erotic romantic suspense, Lora Leigh writes amazing seal stories, so definitely check out the Tempting Seals and the Elite Ops series. Those are spin-offs of each other, so you should start with the Tempting Seals and then move into the Elite Ops, although you can read them out of order. I actually read them out of order. I started with the Elite Ops and then I read the Tempting Seals because I didn't know any better. And if you're looking for just straight contemporary erotic romance, I'm not going to go into the really weird stuff that she's written, like The Men of August, because that definitely might not be for everybody, but I will recommend the Bound Hearts series. And for Jaci Burton, I obviously have to mention the Play-by-Play series, which is still to this date one of my favorite sports contemporary romance series, so definitely check out that series. The Hope series, which is small town contemporary romance, they're perfect summer reads. If you're looking for a little bit of romantic suspense, I highly suggest her biker books, and that is the Wild Riders series. A great contemporary holiday series is the Kent Brothers series by Jaci Burton. These are more like novellas, and she also has 2 great standalone novels, and they each have 3 stories. They are erotic romance. The first is Wild, Wicked, and Wanton, and the second is Bound, Branded, and Brazen. Now, I still have plenty of Jaci Burton books to read, especially her older paranormal romances, so that is actually something I want to dive into in 2020. Now we're getting closer to the end, and in my number 3 spot is Gena Showalter. I read 44 books by Gena Showalter in the past decade, a lot of those coming from the Lords of the Underworld series, so I can't talk about Gena Showalter without talking about that series. It's probably one of those must-read paranormal romance series of all time. She also wrote a sci-fi romance series that is to this date one of my favorite sci-fi romance series, and that is the Alien Huntress series, which starts with Awaken Me Darkly. That may not be my favorite title in that series, but I loved Seduced to Darkness, Ecstasy in Darkness, Dark Taste of Rapture. They're probably some of my favorite paranormal romances, or I guess you can say sci-fi romances. And there is actually a spin-off of the series, and that is the Otherworld Assassin series. I also have to mention a YA title that I really enjoyed by her, and that is Alice in Zombieland. And then her contemporary romance series, the original Heartbreakers, which starts with The Closer You Come. Coming in at number 2 is Lauren Dane, and I read 47 books by Lauren Dane. I could sit here again all day and recommend books by Lauren Dane. I absolutely love all her books. There's a variety of things that you can read from her in all different genres. One of my absolute favorite series is the Brown Siblings series, which is contemporary erotic romance, or I guess maybe just contemporary romance, but very sexy. I love this family. It's one of my favorite families of all time. And there is a spin-off series of that, which is the Delicious series. Then in paranormal romance, I loved her Cascadia Wolves series, the De La Vega Cats, which is a spin-off of the Cascadia Wolves, and Bound by Magic, which is again sort of a spin-off of those two. They're all set in the same world, and I think they're great paranormal romances. And there's more great contemporary romance series by her. There's the Chase Brothers, the Petal Georgia series, Ink and Chrome, the Hurley Boys, and one of my favorite all-time second chance standalone romances, which is just simply called Second Chances. And we've made it. We've gotten to the end. This is going to be my number 1 spot. I was probably a little surprised, but definitely I know I've read a ton of books by this author, and I love this author. And on the number 1 spot goes to Lorelei James. I read 49 books in the past decade by Lorelei James. I loved most of them, and she's also written one of my favorite all-time families in contemporary romance, actually erotic romance, and that is the Rough Rider series, which is a cowboy erotic romance series. This is a must-read if you like cowboy romance. I feel like Lorelei James is the queen of that subgenre, and definitely the Rough Rider series is my absolute favorite by her. I did struggle getting into the series a little bit, but once I got past book 1 and 2, because 2 has one of my most hated characters of all time, but it quickly went on to become one of my addictions. I gobble that whole series up super fast. It has great emotional depth. It has characters that just become part of your family, and I can't recommend that series enough. She also has another cowboy romance series, which is the Blacktop Cowboy series, which I also really enjoyed. She also writes contemporary erotic romance in the BDSM series Mastered. And then there's of course her more recent contemporary romance series, the Need You series, and that is more family centric, and it does have different types of tropes with each book. And there you have it, guys. That is the end of my list for the authors that are the most read authors for me in the last decade. It was really fun for me to look back and see where each one of these authors landed on the list, and it also made me question why I thought I had read more from some of the authors that were lower on the list or that didn't make it on this top 20. So it's definitely left me thinking about other books that I could be reading in the next decade. I hope that you guys found some good recommendations and something that caught your eye in this video. And if you haven't read some of these authors, I really hope that you give them a try. They are some of my favorites. If you've read any of the authors that I talked about in this video, leave me a comment down below and let me know what you thought of them. As always, don't forget to follow us on the blog at underthecoversbookblog.com and all our social media channels. You can find reviews for a lot of these authors on the blog, and I've also left links to the books that I mentioned in the information box down below. Like this video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our videos, and thank you so much for watching, guys. We'll see you again in the next one. Bye!